Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're taking a truly fascinating and honestly incredibly practical source document, which is essentially this dense 10-part checklist packed with over 140 different success metrics. And we're going to translate all of that into a streamlined, high-level navigation dashboard. This is all about figuring out how to actually measure your company's strategic pivot. Let's jump right in. Okay, picture this scenario. You've recognized a massive market shift. You've done the grueling work, and you've officially changed your company's course. You've pivoted. But here's the absolute most critical question. Now what? If you don't know exactly how you're going to measure the success of that new direction, you are essentially flying blind into the unknown. A pivot without a solid measurement framework? Well, that's really just a very expensive guess. You need a system to ensure the massive risks you're taking are actually translating into tangible progress. So to build that system, we're going to follow this 5-step agenda. 1. Setting your new course. 2. The hard numbers. 3. The human element. 4. Building your dashboard. And 5. Reviewing and recalibrating. Let's start with step 1, setting your new course by defining the objective and your key performance areas. Before we even think about opening a spreadsheet or looking at a single number, we have to anchor our new direction by explicitly setting the coordinates. Our source document makes it super clear. Every pivot needs a defined objective anchored directly to your new business model. You literally have to write down the exact purpose of your metrics. Is it to track strategic outcomes, or maybe it's just to measure immediate post-pivot progress? You also absolutely need a specific review period. Now, why does that matter? Because those early days right after a pivot are just inherently chaotic. Having a locked-in timeline for when you'll actually review the data prevents reactionary panic. And crucially, you need a clearly defined, responsible leader for this objective. Without an owner, the whole thing just won't survive the transition. Once you've got that overarching objective locked in, the source guides us to map out these 6 key performance areas. Think of these as the main structural pillars of your new business model: customer growth, product adoption, financial health, operational efficiency, team development, and brand strength. For every single one of these categories, you have to be ruthless and assign a strategic importance level, high, medium, or low, and then give it direct ownership. Listen, if you try to treat every single area as your absolute top priority, you essentially have 0 priorities. Categorizing your focus right out of the gate is exactly what keeps you from drowning in data later on. All right, moving right along to section 2, the hard numbers, meaning your quantitative, financial, and operational metrics. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is how we determine if your new business model is actually viable out there in the real world. You must establish targets, current baselines, and measurement frequencies for your core quantitative metrics. Things like revenue growth, customer retention rate, and gross margin, these are your bedrock. But I really want to highlight the necessity of establishing a baseline first. If you try to measure these numbers without a clear starting point, it is literally impossible to know if your pivot is actually causing the growth or if you're just coasting on some natural market momentum that was already happening anyway. You've got to know where you started to measure how far you've gone. Now, when we break down the really high-level financial indicators, revenue, profitability, cash flow, ROI, it's just not enough to casually look at your targets versus your actuals. The secret sauce here is the deviation trigger. You need to prepare a specific, concrete action plan for any deviations. Say your cash flow suddenly drops below the target threshold. Your framework needs to instantly trigger a predetermined response. You absolutely do not want to be brainstorming a solution in the middle of a financial panic. By mapping out these deviation plans in advance, you transform what could be a massive crisis into a totally manageable routine procedure.
But remember, it's not just about the money coming in. It's about how the actual machine runs. Operational indicators, like the stability of your supply chain, delivery efficiency, process automation, and quality control, they all need their own specific key performance indicators. The source emphasizes that you need to assign specific monitoring tools and responsible folks to each of these operational cogs. Making sure the engine is purring smoothly behind the scenes is exactly what protects your profit margins in a new venture. Think about it. If your delivery efficiency tanks, your cost per unit is going to skyrocket, and you're going to miss your financial targets no matter how much new revenue you bring in.
Which brings us to section 3. This is the stuff people always forget, the human element. We're talking qualitative and team metrics. Notice the really stark contrast here. Executives usually obsess over the cold, hard cash metrics, right? Customer acquisition costs, lifetime value, time to market. Those are the numbers dominating the boardroom. But balancing all of that out are the human elements: customer satisfaction, brand perception, and team morale.
Our source material makes a seriously compelling case that these qualitative metrics are equally critical during a pivot. Because look, if your team burns out from the massive workload, or if your legacy customers absolutely hate the new brand direction, those hard numbers are eventually going to collapse. The human element is the foundation holding the financial metrics up.
Of course, because these human elements are kind of inherently abstract, you have to evaluate them through really concrete methods. You track customer satisfaction through rigorous surveys and net promoter scores. You gauge brand perception using targeted social listening tools to see what the market is actually whispering about your pivot. And I love this concept from the source, tracking an innovation index. You do this by actively counting the number of new initiatives, pilot programs, or patents your team produces post-pivot. It's brilliant. It takes abstract creative energy and turns it into measurable, trackable data. It literally tells you if your new direction is inspiring your team to build. So the big takeaway here is that a successful new direction requires tracking internal organizational growth just as fiercely as you track external market share. The source explicitly calls out tracking employee retention rate, the number of training hours per employee, and calculating a leadership development index. And it makes total logical sense. When you pivot, your team inevitably has to learn new skills to pull off the new model. If your training hours are low, your pivot is highly likely to just stall out due to a sheer lack of internal capability. A new direction needs new capabilities, and those capabilities have got to be measured. Okay, Section 4, Building Your Dashboard. This is all about the monitoring and reporting framework. The source provides this incredible framework grid to bring all these scattered metrics into perfect organizational clarity. To stop metric chaos in its tracks, every single category requires a designated reporting method, a specific review frequency, a named responsible reviewer, and a dedicated tool. So, for example, making sure operational metrics get reviewed weekly by the COO using an internal tracker, while customer metrics are looked at quarterly by the CMO via the CRM. This structure is what prevents critical data from falling through the cracks. It guarantees that the right numbers actually get reviewed by the right person at exactly the right time using the right software. No more messing.
Finally, Section 5, Reviewing and Recalibrating, creating your success review summary. So how do you actually stay on course once the ship has officially sailed? Based on the source's success review summary, you can transform your oversight into this incredibly dynamic four-step process. First, define what absolute success looks like for the new direction. Second, set the minimum threshold, and by that I mean the absolute lowest acceptable performance before executive intervention is required. Third, and this might be the most vital, identify red flags and failure indicators well in advance. And fourth, establish a strict review period for recalibration. This continuous loop ensures you aren't just passively collecting data for some boring monthly report, but you're actively using it to course correct the very second you spot a red flag on the horizon. To wrap up our explainer today, I want to leave you with this final, highly provocative question taken verbatim from the source document. How will success be defined and measured in the new direction to ensure strategic growth, operational excellence, and long-term sustainability? Take this exact question into your next strategy meeting. Challenge your team to answer it definitively before you commit to your next big move. Because if you can't answer it clearly, you simply aren't ready to pivot. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.